Hello and good evening. I hope that you are all doing well. So I realize that I've been here a lot today. It's because I actually have work that I need to do tomorrow. And I figured while I'm on a roll and I have the time and I have the brain power to go through so much of this, that I would take the opportunity to do so. So earlier today, well, just to kind of recap, we find ourselves going through the book of Genesis. And I guess I'm doing a more significant explanation than I had originally intended to. And that's just kind of because I feel like it's hard for me to go through things and not explain them if I see the need to do so. And so I am doing exactly what I wanted to as far as highlighting what appears in Revelation in this text also, but just doing kind of a more complete explanation than I had originally intended, which obviously is going to be fine. But the first video goes through Genesis 1-3, and that is the story of creation. I just went through and I edited the titles of these to kind of give a little bit of a snapshot of what is discussed in each of these videos. So in the first video in this series, Genesis 1-3, I titled that Creation, the Fall, and Redemption, because it goes through those 3 chapters which discuss all of that. And then the second video is Genesis 4-9. There's a lot that I go through in there, and that goes through Enoch and Noah and the giants and the flood. And then the last video that I did earlier today goes through Genesis 10 and 11, and that is the genealogies, but mostly it's Nimrod and Babel and Babylon. That is a significant connection that should not be overlooked. And again, and I pointed this out in that video, that I realize that there are a lot of people who do not subscribe to a literal interpretation of Babylon being in the plains of Shinar relative to Nimrod and the first one world government and everything like that, but it is. And that is explained in that video, which is significantly shorter than the first 2. It's about 38 minutes long rather than just shy of 2 hours, which the other ones were. So this is actually going to be probably a lengthy video because I have a lot to go through. I am excited to go through this. I have been looking forward to getting to these chapters. I look forward to all of it because I think that it's all very interesting. Hopefully you guys do as well. But this is where we start to get into the Abrahamic covenant promises. Now, when we went through Genesis 10 and 11 earlier, the Shem, Ham, and Japheth, their genealogies, their lines, and I went through how we can see the development of the who is going to be against Israel, because you see, and I went through Ezekiel and kind of touched on Psalm 83 also. Ezekiel is important to the Revelation story, Ezekiel 38 and 39, because that is actually what leads into the 70th week. That is the unifying event that brings Israel back to one for the purposes of worshiping God, not yet their Messiah, but for the purposes of worshiping God. On the heels of that is the arrival of the Antichrist, who confirmed Daniel 9:27's covenant to lead into the 70th week. I did not highlight that earlier. What I did highlight was in Japheth's lineage, you find a significant portion of the groups of people listed in Ezekiel 38 that come against Israel. The pit of lineage from son versus lineage from son is kind of encompassed at the end of Genesis 9. And so you see the people groups listed in these conflicts that will involve Israel later. Psalm 83, some of them are mentioned there, but that's more got to do with Isaac versus Ishmael, Hagarenes, Hagar. You've got the Edomites, Jacob versus Esau. And then you've got Ammon and Moab, which are Lot. So they're basically the sibling rivalries that we haven't gotten to yet, and results of unions that never should have happened, like with Ishmael, Abram and Hagar and Ishmael, and Lot and his daughters, and all of that stuff. So there's a lot of stuff that's kind of set up in these early chapters. And you learn that from the genealogies that are in Genesis 10 and 11. Now, where we leave off in Genesis 11 is with the genealogy of Shem, which leads to Abram. and that's where we get into now, because the line of Seth led to Noah, and then Noah's son Shem leads to Abram, and Abram, who becomes Abraham, leads to Jesus. So this is the line that we are, for the purpose of looking at Israel, this is the line that we are most concerned with at this point, and that is where we left off in Genesis 11. So now we begin in Genesis 12, and this is very importantly linked to, and one other thing. I said that Ezekiel 38 and 39 is the unifying event. Right now, Israel is not one. They wouldn't do anything as one. You can tell how divided Israel is just on account of how their political structure works right now and how many elections they've had trying to even form a government in the past several years. Gog and Magog is the unifying event that will bring Israel back to one in order to do something as one, which is unite in purpose toward God. Again, not yet toward Christ, but toward God, rebuilding the temple, going back to the old covenant, reinstituting the sacrificial system, all of these things that you see set up to go into and will occur during the 70th week. So Gog and Magog is a unifying event that will accomplish that. And again, you see the people groups listed in Genesis 10, which will be involved in that. Magog, Tubal, Meshach, Sheba, Dedan, the merchants of Tarshish, Cush, Put, all of them. They're listed in Genesis 10 as descendants of Japheth and Ham. Not Shem, because again, Shem is the line that will produce the Messiah. Psalm 83, a little bit different. That's going to be wrapped up at the end. That is also pinpointed specifically to the book of Revelation. Ezekiel, not quite specifically pinpointed to the book of Revelation, but it's what leads into the covenant confirmation. It's literally like the last thing before the Antichrist gets there, and the Antichrist getting there is Revelation 6, 1 and 2, opening of the first seal. So it's linked to it, although not directly stated. Psalm 83, a lot of people like to put this as something that we'll see before the rapture or tied to the rapture or something that we'll see, while we're still here. It's not. It's linked to the second coming and all of the cities of the nations falling, which is what happens. It's specifically mentioned right before Great Babylon comes into remembrance before God to give to her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. So all of the cities of the nations falling, that is Psalm 83, and God doing unto these people groups as he did unto in the book of Judges, which is where those stories originate from. Israel playing a part in that per Zechariah 12. But Psalm 83 is linked to Revelation in Revelation 16, where it's after the seventh vial judgment is poured out, a voice from heaven saying it is done. And then there's a great earthquake. The cities of the nations fall. The cities of the nations falling are all of those: Damascus and Edom, Moab, Ammon, all of the cities that are listed in Jeremiah 46 through 49, Babylon being Jeremiah 50 and 51, Amos 1 and 2, Zephaniah 2. Those are the ones I can think of off the top of my head. Anyway, they're all linked. I think that was all I wanted to go through, because I kind of just lost my train of thought because my cat's acting weird. She has a tendency to do that when I need to concentrate. All right, come up here. Lay down. Lay down so I can get on with this. Come on. Lay down. Lay down. Okay. Now we're good. Whatever. Okay, Genesis 12. After these genealogies, letting us know that Abram comes from Shem's line. We have the Abrahamic covenant. This is going to be specifically addressed in the book of Revelation. And this is something I haven't specifically brought up before, but it is important to note, and it is going to be found in Revelation 7. I have discussed part of what I will discuss tonight, but not all of it. Genesis 12:1. Now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land I will show thee. This is what the previous chapter kind of ended with, Genesis 11:31. Terah took Abram his son, and Lot the son of Haran his son's son, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went forth with them from Ur of the Chaldees to go into the land of Canaan. So this is what Genesis 12:1 is talking about. When he said, get thee out of thy country, Ur of the Chaldees, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee, Canaan. This will become the promised land. This is the first of 3 promises that correspond to the Abrahamic covenant. The promised land promise. There are 3 promises that are given to Abram in these first 3 verses of Genesis 12. The first is the promised land promise. The second is the natural seed promise. I will make of thee a great nation. I will bless thee and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. The next, and I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee, and in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. Spiritual seed promise. So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their substance that they had gathered, and the souls that they had gotten in Haran. They went forth to go into the land of Canaan. Into the land of Canaan they came. Promised land. Abram passed through the land of the place of Sichem, and the place unto the plain of Moreh, and the Canaanite was then in the land. Canaan was the son of Ham. The Lord appeared unto Abram and said, Unto thy seed will I give this land. And there builded he an altar unto the Lord who appeared unto him. He removed from thence unto a mountain on the east of Bethel, and pitched his tent, having Bethel on the west and Hai on the east. And there he builded an altar unto the Lord, and called upon the name of the Lord. Abram journeyed, going on still toward the south. There was a famine in the land, and Abram went to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was grievous in the land. It came to pass, when he was come near to enter into Egypt, that he said unto Sarai his wife, Behold, now I know that thou art a fair woman to look upon. Therefore it shall come to pass, when the Egyptians shall see thee, and thou shalt say, This is his wife, and they will kill me, but they will save thee alive. So Abram formulated a plot to say that Sarah was his sister rather than his wife, because he feared that they would kill him and then take his wife because she was pretty. It came to pass that when Abram was come unto Egypt, the Egyptians beheld the woman, that she was very fair. The princes of the Pharaoh saw her and commended her before Pharaoh. The woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. He entreated Abram well for her sake, and he had sheep and oxen and asses and men servants and maid servants and she asses and camels. The Lord plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. Because Abram wasn't necessarily truthful about who she was, because he didn't want to be killed. And so Pharaoh was kind of set up thinking that she wasn't someone's wife, and he wanted her. So then God plagued Pharaoh because Pharaoh didn't know better. Pharaoh called Abram and said, What is this that thou hast done unto me? Why didst thou not tell me that she was thy wife? Because he's like, I wouldn't have done this if I had known. And he said, why didst thou say she is my sister? So I might have taken her to me to wife. Now therefore, behold thy wife, take her and go thy way. He's like, leave me. I don't want these plagues. I don't want this hardship. Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they sent him away and his wife and all that he had. Well, yeah, because why? Yeah. Don't lie. That's the moral of that story. There's no reason to lie. Abram went up out of Egypt, he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot with him into the south. Abram was very rich in cattle and silver and in gold, and he went on his journeys from the south even to Bethel, unto the place where his tent had been at the beginning between Bethel and Hai, unto the place of the altar, which he had made there at the first. There Abram called on the name of the Lord. Lot also, which went with Abram, had flocks and herds and tents. The land was not able to bear them, that they might dwell together, for their substance was great, so that they could not dwell together. There was a strife between the herdsmen of Abram's cattle and the herdsmen of Lot's cattle, and the Canaanite and the Perizzites dwelled then in the land. Abram said unto Lot, let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, and between my herdsmen and thy herdsmen, for we be brethren. Is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go right, or if thou depart to the right hand, then I will go left. Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld all of the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere. Before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as thou comest unto Zoar. Then Lot shows him all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east and separated themselves the one from the other. Abram dwelt in the land of Canaan. Lot dwelled in the cities of the plain and pitched his tent toward Sodom. So eventually, we're going to learn of Lot and the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. That is actually in Genesis 19. But this is the point at which Abram and Lot separated. So Abram left Haran with his wife and his nephew and all of his possessions. Went to Egypt, lied, caused trouble there, was kicked out. And then because he had so much, Lot and his stuff couldn't dwell on the same spot as Abram and his stuff. So they separated, and Lot went toward Sodom, and Abram went in the opposite direction. So this is where we first have an introduction to Sodom and Gomorrah. Genesis 13. But the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly. The Lord said unto Abram, after that Lot was separated from him, lift up now thine eyes and look from the place where thou art, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land which thou seest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed forever. Again, this is the promised land promise. And I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can number the dust of the earth, then shall thy seed also be numbered. So this goes to the second part of the Abrahamic covenant promise, which was made in Genesis 12, because this is going to be restated several times. I will make of thee a great nation. I will bless thee and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. So he's basically saying that your descendants are going to be innumerable. This is the first time that he says, I will make it to number as the dust of the earth. When we get into later chapters, it's going to be the stars of the sky, sand of the sea, that kind of thing. Innumerable. Verse 17 of chapter 13, arise, walk through the land and the length of it and the breadth of it, for I will give it unto thee. Then Abram removed his tent and came and dwelt in the plain of Mamre, which is in Hebron, and built there an altar unto the Lord. So, again, we have the promised land promise and the descendants numbering as the sands of the sea, stars of the sky, dust of the earth promise, that essentially he's going to make of him a great nation. So this is the second time in 2 chapters that we've heard of this. In chapter 12, we were first introduced to it. In chapter 13, it's restated. So the Lord is continuing to remind Abram and to show him exactly what he intends to do. The first time by actually walking the perimeter of the promised land and saying, as far as you can see in all directions, this is going to be yours, and you're going to have innumerable descendants. So this next chapter, Genesis 14, is actually interesting because this is the introduction that we have to Melchizedek. And this is the Jesus being after the order of Melchizedek. That as great as Abram is, the forefather of Israel, there is one greater that he will yet pay homage to. And that is something that is also talked about in the Psalms in one place, and in Zechariah 6. There is a prophecy that Jesus would unite the office of that a branch would come out of Israel, branch meaning Nazareth or the Nazarene. Behold, a man whose name is the branch, and he will, let's see, Zechariah 6. Zechariah 6, 12, and 13. Speak unto him, saying, Thus speaketh the Lord of hosts, behold a man whose name is the branch. He shall grow up out of his place. He shall build the temple of the Lord. That's talking about the spiritual temple, which is well after the point in Genesis that we are at. Even he shall build the temple of the Lord. He shall bear the glory. He shall sit and rule upon his throne. He shall be a priest upon his throne. The council of peace shall be between them both. This is the king and priest after the order of Melchizedek. Melchizedek was both king and priest, king of peace, king of righteousness, priest of the Most High God. And this is something that is obviously being foreshadowed in Genesis before the law is given to Moses, and well before the Levitical priesthood, because we know that the king always came from the tribe of Judah, the priest always came from the tribe of Levi, so that was separated. So before all of that is even given in the law in Exodus, it is foreshadowed that there will come one who is greater than both, who will eventually combine the offices of both, and who will be greater than Israel's greatest forefather, Abraham. And this next chapter is where Melchizedek comes from. That is talked about in Hebrews chapter 5 and 6 and 7. So, continuing in Genesis 14, it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Kedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of nations, that these made war with Bera, king of Sodom, and with Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, and Shemeber, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, which is Zohar. These names are all real fun. All of these were joined together in the Vale of Siddim, which is the Salt Sea. 12 years they served Kedorlaomer, and the 13th year they rebelled. And the 14th year came Kedorlaomer of the kings, and were with him, and smote the Rephaims, and Ashtaroth, Karnaim, and the Zuzims, and Ham, and the Emims in Shiva. Yeah, there's another word that I can't pronounce. And the Horites in their Mount Seir unto El Paran, which is by the wilderness. This is a slaughter of the kings anyway. And they returned and came to En-Mishpat, which is Kadesh, and smote all the country of the Amalekites, and also the Amorites that dwelt in Hazazon Tamar. It's interesting because the Amalekites and the Amorites and the Zuzims and the Rephaims, these are all tribes of giants. Because remember, there were giants in those days and also afterward. And Nimrod became a mighty man before the Lord. And these are tribes of giants and unnatural beings. So it's just kind of interesting to note that we're seeing this still in Genesis 14. Verse 8, there went out the king of Sodom, and the king of Gomorrah, and the king of Admah, the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, the same is Zoar. And they joined battle with them in the Vale of Siddim, with Kedorlaomer, the king of Elam, and with Tidal, king of nations, and with Amraphel, king of Shinar, Babel, plains of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, 4 kings with 5, and the Vale of Siddim was full of slime pits. That's also kind of interesting because when we went through Genesis 11 and Nimrod and the Tower of Babel and the one world government, or the one world kingdom, the one world, yes, the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. It came to pass, they journeyed in the east, that they found a plain of Shinar. They dwelt there. They said to one another, go and let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick and stone and slime that they had for mortar. Tar pits. Oil fields. And that's kind of like the first oil fields. And the Vale of Siddim was full of slime pits. It's kind of what that was. Because you have to think Middle East, where are they right now? And so that's kind of what the Middle East is famous for. The king of Sodom and Gomorrah fled and fell there, and they that remained fled to the mountain. They took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah, all their victuals, and went their way. They took Lot, Abram's brother, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. There came one that had escaped and told Abram the Hebrew, for he dwelt in the plain of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol, the brother of Aner, and these were confederate with Abram. When Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his trained servants born in his own house, 318, and pursued them unto Dan. And he divided himself against them. He and his servants by night smote them, pursued them unto Hobah, which is on the left hand of Damascus. So after this battle of the kings, he was told that Lot was taken captive. So Abram went and took a bunch of people and got Lot back, along with all of the items that had been stolen along with him. He brought back all the goods and also brought again his brother Lot, his nephew, but his brother in the Lord, I suppose, and his goods. The woman also and the people. The king of Sodom went out to meet him after his return from the slaughter of Kedorlaomer, and the kings that were with him at the vale of Shavah, which is in the king's dale. So that's the slaughter of the kings. Melchizedek, king of Salem. Salem means peace. Brought forth bread and wine. What's that representative of? The Last Supper, the bread and the wine. He was the priest of the Most High God. So he's king of Salem, king of peace, offering the same things to Abram that the Lord offered at the Last Supper as tokens of the new covenant, foreshadowing that there would come one who was also greater than Abram, to which Israel would need to pay deference, who is also king of peace and priest of the Most High God, Jesus. He blessed him and said, "Blessed be Abram of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be the Most High God, which had delivered thine enemies into thy hands." And he gave him tithes of all, because Abram recognized that Melchizedek was greater. So he paid tithes to him. Important for Israel to understand in this new covenant period, which is why Hebrews 5-7 discuss this, that Hebrews is kind of a setup for, you think angels are great, Jesus is infinitely greater. He's not an angel, he's infinitely above them. You thought Moses was great, well, Jesus is infinitely greater. You thought David was great, well, Jesus is infinitely greater. You thought Melchizedek was great, well, Jesus is infinitely greater. You thought all of these people in your history were great, well, Jesus is infinitely greater. Kind of the whole point of the book of Hebrews is letting them know that Jesus is greater than all of the people that they think are great in their history. And the king of Sodom said unto Abram, "Give me thy persons, and take thy goods to thyself." And Abram said to the king of Sodom, "I have lifted up mine hand unto the Lord, the Most High God, the possessor of heaven and earth, that I will not take from a thread even to the shoe latchet, and that I have not taken, that I will not take anything that is thine, lest thou shouldest say, I have made Abram rich." So Abram went and got his nephew back and the things which belonged to him only, and he took nothing else that was not his, save only that which the young men had eaten, and the portion of the men which went with me, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre, let them take their portion. So that is something that will obviously have, or chapter 14 is obviously something that will have greater significance in the future. Again, the Old Testament is the New Testament concealed, and the New Testament is the Old Testament revealed. So the significance of Genesis 14 is revealed in understanding who Jesus is after the order of Melchizedek. And that's really, the book of Hebrews explains that. So that's kind of what that is that Abram, who the Lord is covenanting with to say, I'm going to give you a promised land, I'm going to give you a whole lot of descendants, and I'm going to send the natural seed or the spiritual seed through your line, is obviously, as great as that is, as great as these promises, this covenant is going to be, and as much significance as it is going to have in the eternal capacity, there is one that is greater than him. And that's Melchizedek, whom Jesus is said to be after the order of, which means that Jesus is greater than Abram. Genesis 15. After these things, the word of the Lord came unto Abram in a vision, saying, Fear not, Abram, I am thy shield and thy exceeding great reward. When Abram said, Lord God, what wilt thou give me, seeing I go childless, and the steward of my house is this Eliezer of Damascus? And Abram said, Behold, to me thou hast given no seed, and lo, when born in my house is mine heir. So he said, I'm going to bless thee and make thy name great. And then he said, you're going to have descendants that are like uncountable, like the dust of the earth. If you can count the dust of the earth, that's how many descendants you're going to have. So now we're back to these Abrahamic covenant promises. And he says, well, I don't have any natural seed. I don't have any heirs except for the steward of my house. Nevertheless, have no fear, Abram. Behold, the word of the Lord came unto him, saying, This shall not be thine heir. The steward of his house is not who these descendants are going to come through. But he that shall come forth out of thine own bowels shall be thine heir. He brought him forth abroad and said, Look now toward heaven and tell the stars, if thou shalt be able to number them. And he said unto him, So shall thy seed be. So we have dust of the earth, and now we have stars of the sky. So clearly, there's going to be a lot of descendants that are going to come through Abraham directly. But as of yet, he has no children. So how can this be? However, he believed the Lord, and it counted to him for righteousness by faith. He didn't need to see it. He just needed to believe it because the Lord said it. And so he said, okay, I believe you. We must understand that Abraham was not justified by his works. We get to the near sacrifice of Isaac. That is a demonstration of his faith. It is not what justified him. Abraham was already justified. Right here in Genesis 15:6, Abraham is justified by his faith. Anything that he does after that is just demonstrating that he has faith. It would be like part of the sanctification process, not part of the justification process. And a lot of people confuse this in the book of James because it talks about James 2. The order of operations, the order of events relating back to Abraham and how Abraham was justified, not by his works, by his faith. The works part comes 7 chapters later. The faith part comes here in Genesis 15. So I'm not going to go through James 2, but hopefully you guys know what I'm talking about with that. And if not, feel free to ask further questions, but I'm not going to get too far into that right now. Only to say that the faith part comes first and the works part comes later. Verse 7, he said unto him, I am the Lord that brought thee out of Ur of the Chaldees to give thee this land to inherit it. And he said, Lord God, whereby shall I know that I shall inherit it? He said unto him, Take me an heifer of 3 years old, and a she-goat of 3 years old, and a ram of 3 years old, and a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. He took unto him all these and divided them in the midst, and laid each piece one against another, but the birds divided he not. This is going to be representative of the covenant. Covenants in the Old Testament had blood and animal sacrifices along with them. The first time that we saw this was, well, obviously there was one in the garden that wasn't specifically related to a covenant, but it was it was foreshadowing the redemptive process, where God clothed Adam and Eve with skins. Obviously there was a sacrifice and blood involved with that, because without the shedding of blood is no remission. But after in Genesis 9, after Noah and his family got off the ark, that was part of the reason where they had to take 7 of each of the clean animals, because Noah offered a sacrifice to God while God covenanted with him. So there was an animal sacrifice along with that covenant. What we're going to see here in Genesis 15 is the same thing, that there's about to be a covenant, and there will be blood and animal sacrifices along with it. Verse 11, and when the fowls came down upon the carcasses, Abraham drove them away. When the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and lo, and horror of great darkness fell upon him. he said unto Abram, know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in the land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and shall afflict them 400 years. This is talking about prophecy, and this is talking about Egypt. And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterward shall they come out with great substance. So this is actually talking about what we first learned about in Exodus, the Exodus from Egypt, because they were going to be slaves in Egypt for that 400 years. But they would come out and be given a land that God promised them, the promised land. So he says, know of a surety that this will happen, but before this happens, they're going to be slaves in a land that isn't theirs. And then they're going to come out into the land that is theirs. And that's actually in the book of Joshua. Verse 15, thou shalt go to thy fathers in peace, and shall be buried in a good old age. But in the fourth generation shall they come hither again, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. And it has come to pass that when the sun went down and it was dark, behold, a smoking furnace and a burning lamp that passed through those pieces. In the same day the Lord made a covenant unto Abram, saying, unto thy seed have I given this land, from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates, the Kenites and the Kenizzites and the Cadmonites and the Hittites and the Perizzites and the Rephaims and the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Girgashites and the Jebusites. Okay, so it's important to note here that we have two covenants so far. The Noahic covenant, unconditional. God said, this is what I'm going to do. I do put my bow in the sky as a token of my covenant that I will never flood the world with water again. I will never destroy the world with water again. And I do put my bow in the sky so that when I see it, and when you see it, and when the animals see it, it is a reminder of my promise to never do this. The Noahic covenant is an unconditional covenant. In the same vein, the Abrahamic covenant promise is an unconditional promise. God put Abram in a deep sleep, and he said, I'm doing this. By myself, I'm swearing to you that I am going to do this. I am going to give you the promised land promise. I am going to give you a natural seed promise, and I am going to give you the spiritual seed promise. He did not need consent from Abram other than Abram's faith. He had that already in Genesis 15:6. Abram, he believed the Lord, and it was counted to him for righteousness. So now God is saying, I'm going to do this. This is not a conditional promise. This is not something that Abram needs to do anything for. This is God saying, this is what I'm going to do. And so God is, Abram had to get the animals and to lay them in pieces. And now he's in a deep sleep, and God is actually like passing through the pieces and confirming this covenant all on his own. There is only one Old Testament covenant that is conditional. All the other ones in the Old Testament are unconditional. And this would be the Davidic promise, the throne of David, the Judaic kings, and all of that, the Aaronic covenant, whatever other Old Testament covenants. I think there's 7 of them. The only one that is actually conditional is the Mosaic covenant, and that was predicated upon Israel following God's law, which clearly there were issues with. And then obviously the new covenant, it's not unconditional, but it is something that, it's not conditional because it's already done. The conditional part is whether or not people accept it by faith, and that is a personal decision. But the work was already done in totality by Jesus. Nothing else needs to be done. We just need to accept it by faith. That's the only difference there. But in the Old Covenant, or in the Old Testament rather, the Noahic covenant is an unconditional covenant, and the Abrahamic covenant is also unconditional. We see that in Genesis 15. So God has covenanted with Abram. Now, we addressed in Genesis 15, the end of it, the land part of the promise. In the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, unto thy seed have I given this land, from the river of Egypt. And then he lists the borders. So that's the promised land promise. He said, I'm going to do this. But now we have to address the seed part of it. He doesn't have any. Clearly, in order for them to inherit something, and now there's something to inherit, there's a land to inherit, but there's no seed to inherit it. So let's address that part of it. Genesis 16:1. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, bare him no children, and she had a handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. Sarai said unto Abram, Behold, now the Lord hath restrained me from bearing. I pray thee, go in unto my maid. It may be that I may obtain children by her. And Abram hearkened to the voice of Sarai. You know, it would be, you would think that after the trying to take matters into their own hands and lie in Egypt about Sarah being his sister rather than his wife for fear of them killing him, and then obviously Pharaoh wanted to take her to wife and had the intent of doing that, and then God plagued him because, yeah, no, she's Abram's wife, and he said, why didn't you tell me? Why weren't you honest with me? Go away. I don't want to have anything to do with you. You would think that would have been cause enough for them to begin to trust God, right? Because God said, I'm going to make this happen. So you would think that after preserving them in Egypt, taking care of them and making sure they were okay, that there would have been a little bit more faith going on here. But he didn't have any sons of his own, and Sarah was barren. And so they're like, well, how is this going to happen? So maybe God means this. Well, no. This is why in Psalm 83, two of the people groups listed that are going to attempt to destroy Israel for the purpose of getting at God are the Ishmaelites and the Hagarenes. All because Abram and Sarai took matters into their own hands and involved Hagarenes, and she bore Ishmaelites, and that should never have happened. Verse 3 of chapter 16. Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife. He went in unto Hagar, she conceived, and when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her eyes. So Sarai became envious, but it was her idea to begin with. And Sarah went unto Abram, my wrong be upon thee. I have given my maid into thy bosom. And when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her eyes. No. Hagar despised Sarai. Sorry. And then Sarai, whose idea it was, is complaining to Abram because it kind of backfired on her. Kind of like, what do you expect? Anyway, I was despised in her eyes. The Lord judged between me and thee. But Abram said unto Sarai, Behold, thy maid is in thy hand. Do to her as it pleaseth thee. And when Sarai dealt hardly with her, she fled from her face. The angel of the Lord found her by the fountain of water in the wilderness, by the fountain in the way to Shur. He said, Hagar, Sarai's maid, whence camest thou, and whither wilt thou go? And she said, I flee from the face of my mistress Sarai. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, Return to thy mistress and submit thyself under her hands. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, I will multiply thy seed exceedingly, and it shall not be numbered for multitude. The angel of the Lord said unto her, Behold, thou art with child, shalt bear a son, and shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord hath heard thy affliction. He will be a wild man, his hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him, and he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. So you can see that that's not going to be a good thing. Yeah, she's going to have an exceeding number of descendants. The Lord is going to multiply her seed exceedingly. I don't want to get too far into this conversation, But this is the largest group on earth that hates Israel, is the descendants of the Ishmaelites, the third Abrahamic religion that is not Catholicism or Christianity, the ones who believe Ishmael was the promised seed, that number in the billions of Middle Eastern believers who hate Israel, who are actually in the process of normalizing relations with Israel right now. That's the problem that came out of this situation. I'm not going to specifically name who they are, but I think from that you guys understand who they are. The the ones who consider us infidels. Anyway, but Hagar and Ishmael, he's going to be a wild man. He will be against everyone, and everyone will be against him. He shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. She called his name, and she called the name of the Lord that spake unto her, Thou God seest me. And she said, Have I also here looked after him that seeth me? Wherefore the well was called something. Behold, it is between Kadesh and Bered. And Hagar bare Abram a son, and Abram called his son's name, which Hagar bare Ishmael. And Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bare Ishmael to Abram. So that was an issue, and obviously that will have ramifications. According to Psalm 83, a perpetual war against Israel, because these are not a God-fearing people, not the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob anyway. And so that is obviously something that Israel has always contended with and will continue to contend with until Jesus returns at the second coming. Because again, Psalm 83 is something that is tied directly to Revelation that happens at the very end when Jesus comes back and Jehovah is most high over all of the earth, which happens as a result of the second coming. When all eyes see him and they that pierced him, the tribes of the earth will mourn when they shall see him coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Every knee shall bow, every tongue shall confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. That is kind of how Psalm 83 ends with that. And so there are actually two people groups that are listed in Psalm 83 that are against Israel on account of being enemies of God. Hagarines and Ishmaelites. And that this Genesis 16 is why. Let's see. I'll go one more chapter. Genesis 17, and when Abram was 90 years old and 9, the Lord appeared to Abram and said unto him, so this is 13 years after Ishmael was born. When Abram was 90 years old and 9, the Lord appeared to Abram and said unto him, I am the Almighty, walk before me and be thou perfect. And I will make my covenant between me and thee and will multiply thee exceedingly. Okay, so he's going to make good on his promise that he covenanted with Abram, the natural seed, descendants that number of the stars of the sky and the dust of the earth. I will make my covenant between me and thee and will multiply thee exceedingly. And Abram fell on his face, and God talked with him, saying, As for me, behold, my covenant is with thee, and thou shalt be a father of many nations. Neither shall thy name any more be called Abram, but thy name shall be Abraham. For a father of many nations have I made thee. And I will make thee exceeding fruitful, and I will make nations of thee, and kings shall come out of thee. I will establish my covenant between me and thee, and thy seed after thee and their generations for an everlasting covenant, unconditional, to be a God unto thee, and to thy seed after thee. And I will give unto thee and to thy seed after thee the land wherein thou art a stranger, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting, unconditional promise. And I will be their God. God said unto Abraham, Thou shalt keep my covenant, therefore thou and thy seed after thee in their generations. This is my covenant which ye shall keep between me and you and thy seed after thee. Every man-child among you shall be circumcised. Part of the Abrahamic covenant, and will also be built into the law. Ye shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin. It shall be a token of the covenant betwixt me and you. He that is 8 days old shall be circumcised among you, and every man-child in your generations that is born in your house or bought with money of any stranger, which is not of thy seed. And this is also built into the law, Leviticus 12. And it actually also goes back to something that happened in the garden, that 8th day, and circumcision of the heart versus circumcision of the flesh, and the redemptive process and the Passover. Because circumcision is also tied, when you get to Exodus 12, circumcision is required to partake of the Passover. So they were required to be circumcised as a result of the Abrahamic covenant. And then it also has ties elsewhere, which originate from the part of the story in the garden, which is a foreshadow of the 8th day. And that's kind of like a whole separate conversation. But verse 13 of chapter 17, he that is born in thy house, he that is bought with thy money, must needs be circumcised. For my covenant shall be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant. The uncircumcised man-child, whose flesh of his foreskin is not circumcised, that soul shall be cut off from his people. He hath broken my covenant. God said unto Abraham, as for Sarai thy wife, thou shalt not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall her name be. And I will bless her and give thee a son also of her. Yea, I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. Kings of peoples shall be of her. Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed and said into his heart, shall a child be born unto him that is 100 years old? And shall Sarah that is 90 years old bear? And Abraham said unto God, O that Ishmael might live before thee. God said, Sarah thy wife shall bear thee a son indeed, and thou shalt call his name Isaac. Isaac means laughter, because they both laughed when they heard it. And I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his seed after him. So this is the natural seed promise that would come through Abraham's line. And there's also a tertiary promise, which is that the spiritual seed would come through his line. We haven't gotten there quite yet. As for Ishmael, I have heard thee. Behold, I have blessed him and will make him fruitful and will multiply him exceedingly. 12 princes shall he beget, and I will make him a great nation. Yep. Unfortunately for Israel, the Ishmaelites will be pitted against the Israelites, because the thing with Hagar should never have happened. But my covenant will I establish with Isaac, which Sarah shall bear unto thee at this set time in the next year. So even though Ishmael would be a great nation in his own right, that is not the part of the covenant that God was referring to when he said, you will have descendants that number as the dust of the earth and as the stars of the sky. He was referring to the line that would come through Isaac. That is the son of promise, which makes Genesis 22 all the more important, because that was the son that God was asking Abram to, by faith, sacrifice. Verse 22, he left off talking with Abraham, and God went up from Abraham. Abraham took Ishmael, his son, and all that were born in his house, and all that were bought with his money, every male among the men of Abraham's house, and circumcised the flesh of their foreskin in the selfsame day as God had said unto him. Abraham was 90 years old and 9 when he circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. And Ishmael, his son, was 13 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. In the selfsame day was Abraham circumcised, and Ishmael his son, and all the men of his house, born in his house and bought with money of the stranger, were circumcised with him. So this is the token of the Abrahamic covenant, is the circumcision of the flesh, and they all did that as commanded to by God. Let's see. I think I'm going to stop there, because we have the introduction of the Abrahamic covenant promise, and then the actual confirmation of the covenant, and now the promise of the son that would come through his line. I'm going to go through one more chapter before we get to Lot. Maybe. No, not yet. because this is the setup to the chapter with Lot. So I'm going to stop there. Genesis 12 through 17 talks about the Abrahamic covenant. As we explore more of this, and especially when we get to chapter 22, I am going to talk more about the relationship to the sons of Abraham and how they are shown, not the natural seed part, but the spiritual seed part in Revelation 7. And that's got to do with the multitude that no man could number. Because not only, and this goes to the gracious nature of God, in the Abrahamic covenant promise, we have three things: the promised land promise, the natural seed promise, which we talked about, that Abraham would have descendants that number as the sand of the sea, stars of the sky, dust of the earth, and the promise of the Redeemer, the spiritual seed, would come through his line. There's a differentiation between Abraham having natural descendants that would number as the sands of the sea and as the stars of the sky, but he's also going to have spiritual seed that number as the sands of the sea and as the stars of the sky. That's the grace of God. There's a difference, though, and we learn this in Matthew, and I'll talk about this again. We learn about this in Matthew 3, when John the Baptist is previewing Jesus coming. He says to the religious leaders who show up at the baptism, he says, "Think not to say within yourself, we have Abraham to our father. For I say unto you, God is able of these stones to raise up children to Abraham. Now the axe is laid to the root of the trees. Every tree which bringeth forth not good fruit is hewn down and cast into the fire." Just because God promised Abraham that he would have descendants that number as the sands of the sea and as the stars of the sky, natural seed does not mean that there is a spiritual, eternal promise attached to that. There is, however, a spiritual promise attached to, there is an eternal promise attached to being part of the spiritual seed, which is through Christ. The book of Galatians talks about that. Paul also talks about this in Romans. He says, not all who are Israel are, let's see, I don't want to get this wrong. Romans 9. Not as though the word of God has taken none effect, for they are not all Israel which are of Israel, neither are they all seed of Abraham. Neither because they are the seed of Abraham are they all children, but in Isaac shall their seed be called. That is, they which are the children of flesh, these are not the children of God, but the children of the promise are counted for the seed. So that's just differentiating between the natural seed and the spiritual seed. But a testament to God's grace is that, yes, Abraham is going to have natural seeds that number innumerable. He's also going to have spiritual seed that numbers innumerably, which is evidenced by the redemption of this group of people that no man can number in the throne room in Revelation 7. So even though the innumerable part is actually talking about the natural seed, there is evidence of the grace of God being that the spiritual seed and those who are redeemed through this process of Revelation 4, 5, and 7, this church age is going to result in a multitude which no man can number standing in the throne room of God in glorified state. The redemption of the church is going to be an innumerable number of people. And that goes to the book of Galatians, where it talks about we are sons of Abraham by faith. We are adopted into God's family, made joint heirs with Christ, and become sons of Abraham through the spiritual seed promise of the Abrahamic covenant, not the natural seed promise of the Abrahamic covenant. So I'll discuss more about that, but kind of previewing it now. If you guys have any questions, comments, or feedback, let me know. But that is Genesis 12 through 17 and the first two parts of the Abrahamic covenant promises, and how it is unconditional, it is everlasting, and that means it is irrevocable. So next, when we get into this, we're going to go through Lot, who's in Sodom, and see that story of Sodom and Gomorrah, talk about Ammon and Moab, and that kind of thing. And then obviously we will get into the spiritual seed part of it and all of that. So hi, Cub of Judah. Welcome. Thank you very much for being here. So as always, if you guys have questions, comments, or feedback, let me know. I know there wasn't a huge tie to the book of Revelation in this, but it's kind of setting it up for more discussion in Revelation 7 and the chapters to come. I hope you guys enjoyed and have a great rest of your evening.